Okay, Antonio, we're getting towards the finish line on this. Trust me, we're almost done. And here's the tray that sits down in there, and I want to get it sized. And you'll notice when you set it down in there, probably what you'll notice happen is that the lid won't close, and that's just because of the angle of that lid coming down. It needs a little clearance on the front side of this tray. So the way I'm going to deal with that is just cutting a bevel on here. I've tipped my table saw blade to about a 30-degree bevel, and I want to run this box along this way. The trick here is just to make sure that the box doesn't get tippy, so I'm going to keep it pressed against my rip fence using a push stick, and that'll just kind of hold it in there while I move it forward. And after looking at that, I decided I think this needs a 45-degree angle, so I'm going to tip my blade a little bit more. Okay, show of hands, be honest. How many of you have installed the blade backwards and didn't realize it until you actually started making a cut? But worse, on this case, I actually made all those cuts on that tray, those bevel cuts, with this blade in backwards. I only noticed it when I went to cross-cut this board for the next part of the project, and it was like, That's how you know if you got it in, if you got your blade in backwards, if the board goes. I think the last time I did this was probably 5 or 6 years ago. What are you gonna do? It's just weird that I didn't notice it when I was cutting the tray. I guess because that was just 1/4-inch plywood. It's so thin, didn't make much of a difference. But it did splinter quite a bit, and I just kind of figured that was because I'm using an old blade. I'm such a cheapskate. I buy a new blade like once every 10 years. Maybe not that bad. But I do think it's time for me to get a new blade. I think I've been using this blade for about a year now. Anyways, it's time to make the footrest now, and it's gonna be a little wedge-shaped piece that supports it. So what I want to do is I just got a scrap of wood here, and I'm just going to cut it in half. It's like maybe 13 inches on each side. Now I want to glue and clamp these two pieces together. I really don't need to glue the entire board together because I'm only going to use 5 inches of it. While that's drying, I can cut out the shape for the footrest. It's sort of, I guess it's sort of shoe-shaped, and this is just a scrap of 1x4. In the plans is this cutting template, and this is just a simple shape that I drew out that you can use. You know, just print this out at 100% and you'll be good to go. Or, you know, you just go off book and draw your own shape on there. It can be whatever you want it to be. So what we need to do is apply this template to the wood somehow, and there's a few different ways to do it. If you're really old school and you're able to find some carbon paper, you could actually put this on the board and trace it out that way. Another way you can do it that works out pretty well is just to take a pencil and rub that graphite all over the back of the template, tape this to the board, and then just press down on top of it with another pencil, and that'll draw it on there for you. But my preferred method of using any kind of cutting templates is to use spray adhesive. It's really easy to use. You can just spray it on lightly, and then it usually peels off pretty easily. First, I'm going to cut this down to pretty close to its actual size. I want to make sure that I leave that line showing, obviously, so I know where to cut. There's one straight edge here, and I think I'll start by cutting that on my table saw. I'm clamping this board to my workbench to give me some more freedom to use my jigsaw to cut this out. I'll probably have to adjust that clamp a couple of times. So when you're using a jigsaw, just take it slowly and just try to cut just on the outside of that line. And when you're on the edge of a board, especially getting it started like this, just try to keep it square. Make sure it doesn't tip to the side like that. You should be able to shape this right down to that line on the template. If you use spray adhesive and have a hard time peeling this off, you can hit it with a hot hair dryer and that'll help remove it, or any kind of paint thinner on here will dissolve that adhesive. But usually if you don't put too much on, it comes off pretty easily. All right, now I can get back to those two boards I glued together. And what I want to do is rip this down to 2 inches wide. But first, I want to shave a little bit off of one side so that I have a nice square edge. Now I want to make this little wedge shaped piece here, and what I'm going to do is have this side is going to be the face of the lumber, the smooth side, and then the top is going to be where the two boards come together. I just think it's going to look a little bit nicer that way. And so what I'm going to do is just measure out, let's see, on the face, about 5 inches. Now what I can do is just join these two corners together. So this is all I want, is this piece in here. This kind of a long, narrow, angled cut is called a taper, and it's probably the trickiest cut to do on a table saw. You really need a special jig to help you out with that. We don't need to do that for this one cut. We can just use a jigsaw. And this is why I made this piece oversized, so that there's room to hold on to make that cut. That would be really tricky to hold on to that little bit. So what I'm going to do is just clamp this to my workbench. And here again, you just want to be careful that your jigsaw is going straight up and down and that you're not tipping it. It's going to be a little bit tricky since there's not a whole lot of material here. I could flip this over and sand this even straighter. I'll just glue this onto the footrest. I'm going to let that dry for a few minutes so that it can take hold, and then I'll clamp it down. I'll use that other cut-off wedge to clamp this together. A lot of times when I build projects, I like to kind of pre-attach the hardware, knowing that I'm going to take it back off in order to stain it and finish it. So I'm going to be removing that hinge, and these are the two kind of handle things that the shoeshine cloth goes through. And what I've noticed on images that I've seen of this is that they're kind of offset. They're up here, so that when this footrest is back here, kind of the toe of your foot is up here. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to mount these, and then this footrest, I'm going to screw it into place rather than glue it. It's going to be a lot easier to stain this. So what I can do here is line this footrest up and then just kind of trace around here. Looks like about there. It looks pretty good. So I want to drill 2 holes, you know, right about there and there. When you're drilling pilot holes for screws, choose a bit that's the same size diameter or a little bit smaller than that middle shaft of the screw, not the threads. I'm going to be using 1¼ inch screws for this, but for now I'm just going to drill all the way through here. Now I can drive these screws into those holes to where they're just poking up through the top. I'm just kind of feeling with my finger over here. Obviously, I want to go slow so I don't drill into my finger. About there. So now those are just poking up a little bit, and that'll help me line up this so I can drill pilot holes in it. About there, looks good. And press that down. And that gives me 2 marks. Now I can drill a pilot hole in those. Now what I want to do is position these handles. My guess is that these were designed to be metric because they come to 5 1/16. So I'll just keep that measurement in mind and make it as accurate as possible. So I'll use my square to kind of figure out where I want these to go and draw a line. Something about like that. Cabinet pulls like this come with their own screws, so you can make the holes in the wood actually bigger than the screw, and that actually gives you a little bit of play so that you can line these up if you need to. All right, those fit good. Obviously, I'll tighten that down once I reassemble this box, but I just want to make sure that they fit well. I think I might have positioned those wrong. Antonio, you'd probably know better, but I'm kind of thinking now that these probably needed to go back here a little bit. I'm gonna take my shoe off and test it. So, I think I went too far on that. Should I fix it? Okay, I pulled up an image of this box, and that one even goes closer to the end of the box. So I think it's okay. I think that, I mean, if I was going to fix this, I would fill those holes with a couple of dowels and then sand them smooth. When you make your box, you may want to set that back a little bit further. And I also, just from what I gather on how you use this, it really won't be that difficult to just put my foot anywhere on here while I'm shining it. So I'm gonna go with that. I like the balance of having the end of this kind of match the end of these. I've tipped the box on its back and I've clamped the lid shut. Now I can attach this latch, one on each side. So the screws for this are really tiny 1/2" screws. For whatever reason, these latches that I got on Amazon didn't come with any screws, so you'll have to get these 1/2" screws if you don't have them. So what I'm gonna do here is just drill a very tiny pilot hole just to get the screw started. Usually you just want to drive these in by hand because they're so small. I want this lid to stop right about here so it doesn't come all the way over every time you open it. There's a number of different ways you could do that. The easiest way would be to just attach a chain from here to here and have it stop. And I thought about doing that, but instead I went and got these lid stays. The ones I got come in a pair, so there's a left and a right version. You gotta make sure that you're using the right one. Well, in this case, you'll be using the left one, the correct one, on the right side, the left side. I don't know what I'm trying to say here. You want to use the correct one depending on what side it goes on. I like to attach the box part first, and I'm going to show you the right one so you know what I'm looking at here. So it's got this flat area here. That's the part that goes on the box, and then it has this one that's got like a right angle. That's the one that goes in the lid. So what you want to do is first find the halfway point. So this, when it's open, that hinge of this should be about equal to this hinge. So that's the flexing point, I guess you'd call that. So just kind of measure out, and then you're going to attach that piece there. And then whatever that distance is, you can attach it here. But it doesn't have to be exact. You know, if you wanted your lid to open a little further, you could come down further like this. But I'm trying to keep mine at about a little bit more than a 90-degree angle. So this piece then just gets screwed in up here. And then once again, you're going to want to use these 1/2" screws. Just drill a small pilot hole and drive them in. So that kind of locks it into that position, and then when you want to close the lid, you just pull this up, and then that drops down like that. With that, the assembly of the box is done. I can put this tray back in and close it up. But the box isn't done because we need to apply a finish to protect it. So that means the easiest way to do this is to, unfortunately, remove all of the hardware that we just installed, but it's not going to take too long to do that. Before I apply any finish, I want to give this a final sanding of 220 grit sandpaper. It's totally up to you whether you want to apply a stain to your box or not. I usually prefer just to use the natural color of the wood and then apply a clear top coat to protect it. But I totally understand if you want to just darken up this pine and just make it a different color. In that case, you'll want to use a wood stain like this. And also another thing to keep in mind is that wood stain itself doesn't offer any protection to the wood. It just colors it. It's also worth considering that all wood will darken as it ages, and pine, while it looks really white like this now, over time it'll start to look like these pieces over here. At any rate, I'm going to stain this box just to show you the method I use, and then once the stain is dry, we'll apply a top coat of spray lacquer. The first thing you're going to want to do is apply some wood conditioner to the wood. If you're going to be staining on pine, pine is a real soft wood, and if you apply the stain directly to it, you'll get kind of a blotchiness, and this helps prevent that by sealing up some of the fibers of the wood before you apply the stain. If you want to dive a little deeper into my staining and finishing process, I'll include a link to a different video in the description. So this stuff goes on clear. I'm just going to use a rag to wipe it on. I'm not going to worry about the bottom surface since that's not going to show anyway. And then once that's soaked in for about 15 minutes or so, just wipe off with a dry rag any excess. You want to apply this stain soon after you apply that wood conditioner, like within an hour or so. If you're doing this all at once, you might as well just do it. When you're using stain and other types of finishes, make sure you stir them, you don't shake them. Shaking them just introduces a lot of air bubbles into there that you don't need. I'm going to be using golden oak for this project. It's kind of the only color of stain I ever use. And I'll apply it exactly the same way as I did the wood conditioner. I'll just kind of flood the surface with a rag, and then with stain you want to let it soak in for about 15 minutes and then wipe off any excess. But that gives it a real nice color. Okay, it's been about 10 minutes. I'm going to start wiping off this excess, and this is a really important part. You got to make sure that you wipe off that excess stain, otherwise it just won't dry. Most of the stain soaks into the fibers of the wood. That's the whole point of a stain, and then the stain that just doesn't quite make it just sits on the surface, and it'll just end up just being a gummy mess, sticky. Well, I wanted to show this to you. This is what it looks like without any conditioner on there. You can see all the blotchiness on the stain. I didn't put any on this because I'm going to cover this up with a anti-slip tape, so it didn't really matter. So I mean, you can compare that to like that, smooth and blotchy. So I let the stain dry overnight, and today I'm going to apply a few coats of that spray lacquer. And if you've never used spray lacquer before, check in the description. I got a separate video that'll help you get started with it. It's really easy. Just spray it on and then we'll buff it out. I just buffed this out with some craft paper. I'll put some of this anti-slip tape on the footrest. I almost forgot I got these rubber feet to go on the bottom. Antonio, I hope you enjoyed making this project, and I hope you finish yours up. Be sure and shoot videos so I can show my audience what it looks like. I hope you learned a lot of basic skills with this project. I know this was your first project, and it was a kind of a big one to tackle, but it really covered a lot of different techniques. And for those of you who have been following along with this series for the past 6 months maybe, be sure to check out Antonio's YouTube channel at Real Men Real Style. I'll include a link down in the description. Oh, and by the way, Antonio is going to be a guest on my podcast, Chad and Steve Have a Podcast, coming up real soon. So be sure you subscribe to Chad and Steve Have a Podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. And we also have a YouTube channel. You can subscribe over there. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time.